All right, good morning, everyone. I'd just like to say thank you very much for registering for our webinar. A few instructions to keep in mind before we'll begin this presentation. Just note that you're on mute today. If you do have a question, just use the raise your hand tool, or alternatively, you can type your question into the chat box. If you need any help at all, please let me know. That includes audio issues, or you can use the phone call option on the audio tab that you'll find on the side panel. Thanks, Will. Over to you.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to start by acknowledging the land that we meet on today as the traditional lands for the Australian Aboriginal people, and we acknowledge the Aboriginal community as its custodians, and that their cultural beliefs remain important to all Australians. We acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging, and we welcome any of those elders who may be with us today. I am Will Keston. I'm the state manager here in Tasmania for NDS, but for those who don't know, I have a long history in technology, hence my involvement in the Digital Transformation Digital Champions program. Today is going to be the first session that we're going to focus on cybersecurity. Now, successful digital transformations are just not possible unless cybersecurity is understood and integrated into your strategic plan. We're going to explore some digital tools that will help you check your emails and your passwords for integrity. We're going to, again, just do an overview of digital transformation just at the start, because we know that these webinars, people kind of start to click into the webinar after the first 10 or 15 minutes. We're going to talk about the value and the costs of being hacked. We're going to talk about cybersecurity definitions and points of vulnerability. We're going to talk about managing your risk and at least the minimum recommendations that every organization should think of as we talk about cybersecurity. I always like to throw into any presentation that I do about cybersecurity that although we are talking about business cybersecurity and the protection of business, generally, when I would travel the country and talking to students and employers and employees about cybersecurity, I find that most people have an inherent unnecessary trust within the internet that this is a safe environment. The internet is not a safe environment, and you need to think about your own personal cybersecurity as it relates to social media. We see all of these stories on the news. It is something that's going to constantly change, and the important thing is that the cyber criminals who are targeting you personally as well as businesses, they are well ahead of the game. I would love to say that all the cybersecurity things I'm going to be talking about today are going to protect you completely and totally, but the reality is we need to think smart as we talk about the way that we represent ourselves online and some of the risks for that. As we go on to talk about digital transformation, I'd like to remind all the participants on the line today that every business is a digital business, that it is not necessarily the fact that we happen to provide disability services or care that we are now the digital business, and that is something where all businesses are going. The objectives for every digital transformation are the following. So improving the customer service, increasing efficiency, improving digital decision-making, creating search engine optimization, improving cybersecurity, improving innovation, and transforming the business. And that's part of what this grant is about. It's part of what this program is about. It's really about defining that integration of digital technology into all areas of business. And it should really change fundamentally how you operate and deliver services. It is a cultural change as well, so it's very important that organizations bring their staff with them. It's not about the status quo, it's about being able to experiment, get comfortable, and try to get agile with trial and error with new programs and integrating old legacy systems into new systems. I've shown this graph a few different times, and I'm going to probably show this at the beginning of most of the presentations that we do. The thing that I want to remind everybody is that I get a lot of questions post these webinars about what platforms we should be using. The technology is important, but the digital strategy has to come first. So I would really strongly encourage, and I'm going to be touching base with everybody who participates in the webinars to see how they're coming with the development of their digital strategy. And these are the things that every digital strategy needs. So we have to look at the various aspects of the business goals, your transformation targets. This is a big picture thing, but not necessarily a vision statement. I don't need to know the vision statement for your business, but you have to check out the goals that relate to the new journey of digital transformation. You have to map those out. And you know what? You don't need to know what kind of technology you're going to use to get to those goals. You just need to talk to your executive management team and really talk to your staff about what is going to be the goals of this digital transformation. You need to look at the outcomes, specific desired results across every area of the business, and that should include percentages and estimates about improvements of profitability, engagement, and it needs to be a roadmap. Your personas are your users and your needs, who the engagement are of the key stakeholders that you're trying to use that technology to connect to, and at what level of security you can access those. And again, as far as talking about who the users are and who the needs are, and what kind of security level every person in your organization has, because depending on the security level that they have, the higher security level that they have to your information, the more risk they are of being hacked. So it's really important to map out your users and your needs and exactly what kind of information that your staff can access. The user stories, the vision, the technology, the roadmap, the metrics. When you take a look at the notes that are provided, the fact sheet that's provided along with this presentation, go back and take a look at the definitions of each one of these digital strategy points. They all relate to cybersecurity in one way or another, but I really would strongly encourage every business to start to put their digital strategy together. When we talk about digital transformation and its advantages, you know, there's many benefits for investing in technology-enabled initiatives and leadership capabilities. The financial benefits are pretty impressive, and here's some proof of that. We've got 9% of companies who have done the digital transformation generating more revenue, and I think I can speak for everybody who is connected on this webinar. We would all like to generate some more revenue. 12% of businesses who have digitally transformed have an overall higher market value, and 26% are more profitable overall. The opposite is true if the investment isn't made. And this session is going to focus on cybersecurity, as I mentioned, but without that investment in proper cybersecurity planning and protection, your businesses will experience costs across a number of key areas. So we've talked about a loss of productivity. You're talking about a cost of tracking every single breach that you might have, the additional cost of repairing and rebuilding both the files and the databases, the loss of losing your intellectual property, and then of course the cost of any legal action of trying to recover business costs and any of the legal fees that cases might be brought against you by your clients or your staff or stakeholders if you are affected by a cybersecurity breach. So a lack of investment in proper cybersecurity, one that changes and one that grows, is going to possibly cost you across all of those areas. So I wanted to define some of the important definitions of cybersecurity for you because I'm going to make reference to them, and I wanted to make sure everyone had an idea of what I was talking about. You know, it is important, you know, as far as cybersecurity is concerned, the investment in training and understanding of cybersecurity for business can be expensive. It can be frustrating for businesses. Over the last 20 years, we've really relished the advances that has made ease of use of the internet and accessibility for almost every age demographic. But with the ease of use comes a complacency and an increase in cybercrime. And that's what we've seen. Cybercrime takes two forms. Usually, crimes are either where computers and other information communication technologies are an integral part of the offense. So this is like online fraud. The second part is where crimes are directed at computers and technologies of the companies, where you are hacked in and your information is taken. But you know, the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, which is ACIC, is really concerned about cyber criminals who are trying to make a profit from all Australians. Australia is an attractive target for organized crime syndicates all around the world. And that's due to our nation's relative wealth, the high use of technology that we use here in Australia, especially how active Australians are in social media, online banking, government services. And due to that, there's a lot of possible lucrative financial gains for organized crime syndicates. And I know that sounds very, dramatic, but the fact is that cybercrime is on the rise, and the threat is very, very persistent and very present. The Cybersecurity Review, which was recently led by the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet, found that cybercrime is costing the Australian economy up to $1 billion a year in direct costs alone. That's not even indirect costs. So let's just take a look at some cybersecurity definitions. So, we've got API, and that's an application programming interface. And an application programming interface is an interface or a communication protocol between a client and a server intended to basically simplify the building of client-side software. So many of you would be using APIs every single day, and you would not even be aware of it. I've got the definition there for bot. That's an internet bot. It's also known as a web robot. This is software. It's an application that runs automated tasks over the internet. Typically, bots perform tasks that are both simple and structurally repetitive, and usually at a much higher rate than would be possible for humans to actually do that. I'm sure some of you would have received emails from bots. The second, we've got bot malware. That typically looks for vulnerable devices across the internet rather than targeting specific individuals. So again, a bot would be used for marketing. It can be fairly harmless. It sends out most of our spam emails, but bot malware is specifically looking for vulnerable devices, and they are looking usually to commit crimes. I've talked about, sorry, here we go. Talked about privacy. An excellent way to actually invest in privacy is to operate through a VPN. And a VPN is a virtual private network. It protects computing devices by extending a private network across a public network and enables the users to send and receive data across a shared and public networks as if it's directly being used by a private one. Applications running may benefit from functionality, security, management, and a private network. Encryption is most usually used with a VPN, which means basically it is not foolproof, but it's a really important part of cybersecurity. There are a couple different companies that offer VPNs, and most of you would have heard or seen commercials for the likes of NordVPN, Ghost VPN. Another good one is Express. It is really important that you look at your business running through a VPN. It makes a huge difference, and it is the first step of effective cybersecurity. Then I make reference in the presentation a little bit later about cybersecurity and hygiene, cyber hygiene. It's not about washing down your computer, although some of us might need to do that. This is about referring to best practices that a computer system and administrators can use and undertake to improve their cybersecurity while engaging in common online activities such as web browsing, emailing, backups, and sharing files. So it's really about the policies and the best practices that you have in place. When we talk about good cyber hygiene, it means that you've got policies and systems and procedures in place that your staff are following for even the simplest interaction with the web. I also am going to talk a little bit about multi-factor authentication, or MFA. Now that's, again, very important. That's about basically a method in which your computer will grant access only after successfully entering 2 or more pieces of evidence or factors. It's a real common practice for these factors to have something to do with the user personally. But multi-factor authentication is basically when it sends a code to your phone. Many of us use this with our internet banking. If you don't, you definitely should, where your bank will send you a code before you can access internet banking. That's really multi-factor authentication, and something that, again, allows hackers the opportunities to have to work much harder to get your information. and 2FA is just another term for that second authentication. So, what's the value of a hacked PC? You know, there is incredible value. People say, oh, it's, you know, what's the big deal? Somebody can get to my computer. I don't have a lot on my computer. Let's try to take a look at what happens when somebody really hacks into your computer, and what are they looking for? Although it may seem like accessing a PC is rather difficult, you've got antivirus protection. I'm assuming you all have that. That protects and stops viruses from causing damage, but it doesn't really, and nothing really could be further from the truth than to say that just because I have an antivirus, my computer is actually protected. Cyber criminals are well ahead of the standards and protections, and they certainly know how to get around most virus protection. You may believe that accessing your computer would not yield a financial benefit, but here are only a few of the opportunities that somebody can get to your computer when they get into it illegally. By accessing your computer can immediately become a bot. That allows hackers to remotely access your computer and commit cyber crimes, fraud, and it removes any traces that this has been done remotely. So it looks like your computer has been actually accessing and doing these crimes. Your account credentials are saved on your computer. It allows financial and website credentialing, which again provides hackers with access to encrypted information that you might be privy to, as well as being able to set up things like a fake eBay account or a fake PayPal auctions. In a matter of seconds, these hackers can get in, create a fake eBay account, put fake products on there, all coming from your computer, take the money, encrypt it, get it offline with it, and then suddenly your computer is responsible for what's been created. In addition to your account credentials, they also can get a hold of your financial credentials. That allows access to your bank account, credit card details, stock tradings, and your superannuation data as well, all which plays into identity fraud, which we'll talk about as well. Your computer could be used to host hostage attacks. That allows the creation from your computer of fake antiviruses, ransomware, email ransoms, and webcam extortions. This can all be done remotely and all can be done from your PC. One that people often don't think about when people's computers are immediately hacked is reputational hacking. And this is very, very important for businesses, but persons as well. It allows hackers to pose as you and your company on social media, which can lead to legal action against individuals and companies. So again, by being able to represent themselves as you, they can go on and cause a lot of reputational damage for your business. Virtual goods, it allows access to licensing keys, which means that if you have, for instance, an Outlook package that's updated, all of those licensing keys are saved onto that computer, which means it can be resold. And you suddenly, the packages that you've paid for, that you've got the discs for, that you've got the licensing for, are suddenly being sold around the country or around the world for money. And it also allows them to do sales fraud for goods and items being purchased. Email attacks. Again, it allows the hacker to pose as you to harvest large amounts of data and perpetrate email scams and spam attacks from your computer, which means you are committing ultimately the cyber crime. And then finally, the web server. It allows the hacker to create malware, phishing fraud, which is, again, this multiple bot fraud, using your computer to access things like child pornography and other illegal acts of piracy. So again, without you even knowing it, your computer could be used to search for those things. And of course, those are crimes, and you will actually be, you will be responsible. As you can see, there are huge numbers of risks there for somebody being able to get into your computer. But there's a number of assets that are also at risks. Your product privacy, your confidential information, sensitive information and data about your employees, about your business, about your budgets, about your banking, about the hours of operation, identity theft, computer damage, again, malware, software malware, computer and client privacy, and financial losses as well. So I'm not going to go into great detail. I've put this this particular graphic that was developed by a security awareness expert called Brian Krebs, and a bit of a fan of Brian. When you review this presentation in your own time, I'd like you to take a moment and just read through why you are a target. We're not going to spend a huge amount of time on this today because I've talked to you about some of the risks, but go back and take a look at this graphic and read in more detail why you are a target for cyber criminals. It's important to understand that hackers work into this information from a number of different locations and a number of different devices. So go back and take a look at that when you have an opportunity and learn a little bit about why you are a target. By understanding why, it gives you the opportunity to know why you're building the cyber kind of policies and procedures that you need to build. It's very important with your staff because people are going to push back. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, people have an ease of use. They're very used to just accessing the internet. They want it now. They want it safely. When you start to put cybersecurity in place at work, you will get pushback from your staff, primarily because people like to use it easily. But by understanding and being able to explaining the risks, that hopefully makes an understanding of your staff of why you're putting these things in place. Now, social and digital touch points. I've put this up because it's important to understand where people can hack in. A lot of people say, I've got great cybersecurity at my office across my servers. If I am one of your staff and I am accessing my work emails from my phone, you are only as protected as the cybersecurity that's on that phone. So think about that. As a smartphone user, you can access your data at home, in the car, at the office, at appointments, in the shops, in the office, in the car, and working anywhere else remotely. We often go into Wi-Fi when there's free Wi-Fi, again, very unprotected. And yet here we are on our smartphone accessing confidential business emails, confidential business information. Now, I'm not saying don't do that, but what I am saying is make sure you have the multi-authentication that's required so that all of your staff smartphones are protected just beyond the cybersecurity that every standard smartphone comes with. Once you get into your computer and your desktop, your tablet, and your interactive TV, you can see that there are other digital touch points, and you can see there are less, but even the tablet, again, has many different touch points. So any device that your employer or employee are using to access that information needs to be involved in the same cybersecurity requirements that every other touch point has, including all of your desktop computers. So this is a scary map. Most people think that, when we talk about cybersecurity attacks, that looks pretty frightening. Those aren't, by the way, the cybersecurity attacks. Those are the number of magpie attacks that have happened in Australia. So I just want you to be wary. Cybersecurity is one thing to be frightened of. Magpies are another. And obviously, here are the cybersecurity attacks. Now, look at these are the cybersecurity attacks worldwide that have taken place just in the last 3 months. And then you can see by the size of the dots, the size of the breach. The problem is that Gen Y and millennials are the least concerned about cybersecurity than any other demographic. Yet, though Gen Y and millennials are actually some of the largest workforce that we currently have. So you can see that cybersecurity is something that's happening. The next couple lists, again, something to just look at. There's a point to this. Australia has dropped from 2nd in the world to 11th in the world in its ability to be able to protect itself from cybersecurity attacks. So we're going backwards as far as our ability to be able to protect ourselves from cybersecurity attacks. I've listed a couple lists here. This is the countries with the best cybersecurity, and Australia happens to be on it. You can take a look at some of the other countries that have some of the best cybersecurity. If you take again, going back to look at this, these are the countries that have medium range cybersecurity in place as a country is concerned. And here are some of the worst countries. What I will point out, and the reason I've put these lists on, is that even in this list of the countries with the worst cybersecurity, you would say, well, how does that relate to me? Well, first of all, it allows cyber criminals to actually operate from these countries more effectively. Second of all, you may be holidaying in one of these destinations. If you take a look at some of these destinations on some of the lowest cybersecurity in the world, they are many of the destinations that you may be going with on holiday, and you may be accessing, again, your work email while you're in that country. So again, it's important to realize that cybersecurity is across the world is quite different. And again, these are the kinds of countries. And you're talking about, again, Korea is quite a technology advanced country, but yet they are on they're on the list here as one of the worst countries to have cybersecurity. So again, that's where the risks are coming from. So let's talk about the points of vulnerability in particular, because this is where you need to think about your organization and where are the most vulnerable points. So website plugins. This is a piece of software that acts as an add-on to your web browser that gives your browser additional functionality. So any of the website plugins that you put in is a point of vulnerability depending on their cybersecurity. Website themes. So these are templates that gives your website the look and the feel. So if your website was created, let's say, in WordPress, again, there are cyber criminals that actually specifically focus on websites that are built in WordPress because they know where those programs ultimately are vulnerable. So you can still create in WordPress, you can still have a website in WordPress, but there are cybersecurity platforms that you can do to protect from the gaps that are in these kinds of website themes. And it's really important for an IT professional to assess your website, because many times with website themes, they're not even in use anymore. They're old and retired, but they just sit around in the cloud, and they are always easily access points. Your core databases, your hosting, so where you host your web server. Your file permissions are another point of vulnerability. So who has access to your files? And it is really important to come up with a hierarchy and a structure of who can access what information in your business, even small businesses, in fact, especially small businesses. Password theft. So again, that's an easy point of vulnerability. You're only as strong as the password that your staff come up with. So there are ways around that, which I'll talk about in a minute. Brute force, which is really about robo-systematic programmed attacks. So that is a point of vulnerability of having those robo attacks on your system. There are ways to protect from that. An internal hack. So this might be disturbing to hear, but there are people who are approached to allow criminals to access your information, who work for you, who sell that information, continue to work for you, and many times our information are hacked and we're not even aware. So my point about that is that there should be quite strong criteria in all of your workplace agreements, all of your contracts, and all of your employment HR policies about what the repercussions are if it is found that internal staff have sold, used, or replicated information. And of course, again, your people. So how people use your system, where they use your system, you should be working with your people and your managers to understand exactly where people are accessing your information, how they're accessing. And if they're accessing from their home computer, then you have a right and a need to be able to question your staff on the protection that they have in place on their home computers if they're going to be accessing private information. We want people to obviously put in extra time where they can, and working from home is a very efficient way to do it, but you need to make sure that the devices that are accessing your private, personal, and business information is well protected at all of those points of contact, if that makes sense. So managing your risk. These are the questions that I think every business needs to be asking themselves about their business. And so I'm not going to go through all of them today because I'm going to ask you to go back and take a look, spend some time on this slide as far as being able to manage your risk. But do you treat cybersecurity as a business or as an IT responsibility? And what I can tell you is the answer to that is it needs to be a business. It is just as viable part of your business as support work, as engaging with the NDIS. All of these things are incredibly important. And cybersecurity is a part of your business. It is not just something that you outsource to your IT professional or to your IT employee. You need to have this as a key part. These questions, I'm not going to go through them. As I said, go back and ask these questions about your business. It is very, very important that you come up with the answers to those. There's a couple different sites that I'm going to talk about today that I think are really important, and they are sites that are well protected, but I think they are really important for you to take a look at. So first and foremost, you can put in your email address into this particular site, Have I Been Pawned? And by putting your email into this site, you can immediately check whether your email has been breached, and if it's been breached, where it's been breached. So it's a good opportunity to just see whether there's been a data breach on your email. And again, when you take a look at this presentation, this link will be there. You can type it into your, you copy and paste that directly into your browser and check whether your email has been secured. I checked my NDS email when I was putting the presentation together, and I was very grateful to see that there was actually no breaches to my email. But when I put my personal email address in, there were actually 3 different breaches. And you know where those breaches came from for my email address? Through apps that I had on my phone, which was really interesting because these were apps that I use on a regular basis, and yet the cybersecurity breach came through the app to my email address. The second one is passwords, and there's a couple different ways for you to check your passwords, and it is very important. Cybersecurity and creating passwords, I have a lot of people say, you know what, I've had the same password for 5 years, I've never been breached, I'm fine. You're not fine. And the fact is, it's not a matter of when your password will be breached. As I mentioned to you earlier, these robo criminals are actually there to search thousands of times a second to try to find out your password. They use your personal information on social media, and they take a look at your profile and all of the things about you online to try to come up with what your password would be, particularly social media, because again, we often give references to our passwords without even knowing it. So it's really an understanding whether your passwords have been pawned as well, because if the password has been, immediately you need to change it. But I say this often, and I cannot tell you the looks on people's faces, and I can't see all of your faces, but I will say that I'll bet you that people will roll their eyes when I say that you need to be changing your password every month. None of us want to do it. None of us will do it. But I can tell you, if you're not changing your passwords every single month, you are providing the opportunity for cyber criminals to get into your personal data, your banking data, and it happens very quickly. And often, we use the same passwords across a number of different accessibility points, including your business emails. And so as a business owner, it's so important to understand and work with staff about their passwords and the passwords they create, because again, you are only as safe as the people that work for you and the choices that they make with regards to passwords. But these password checks are really important to take a look at. You can put your password into the box and you can see, good news, your password's never been breached, or, oh no, we found, 1,818 times that this password has been compromised in various databases. If this is your password, you should change it immediately. So again, this password security information is a really good tool to use, and check your passwords for strength as well. You need to have numbers and, and various combinations of things, but, there are also things that you can do to protect your password inadvertently as well. Here's another password way to how easy it is to crack your password. So this doesn't talk about how many times your password has been cracked. This particular tool actually gives you an opportunity to see an assessment of your password and how long it would take for for robo criminals to actually break your password. And you can see that in this particular instance, that password, will take 3.1 billion centuries to actually crack that particular password, or 30 billion years if you have a massive attack, which is, again, those are multiple robots that are actually trying to crack your password all at one time. So I'd go back and I'd check my password against these things and then change your passwords appropriately. It is very important to make sure that you take a look at these links, and it will give you assessment of your passwords and your strength of your password. These are 3 examples. Now, there's quite a few here. Password management organizations are quite good. Basically, you put your password into that organization, and then that organization automatically replicates new passwords every time you access a particular type of information. So by working with these organizations, you have a password with that organization, and then it's another step where basically every time you access something, you're going through that organization, and it's creating a brand new password every single time you're accessing information. They're very safe organizations. They're quite good to work with, and again, it's something that just makes it more difficult for criminals to actually get your data. And the thing is that these cyber criminals that are actually accessing, trying to get data, try to imagine going into work and suddenly be held to ransom for every piece of information that you have, every file, every account, every system that you currently have in place, your Excel, all of your MYOB information, everything is just locked up. And the fact is, even if you reply to that cyber ransom and you pay it, let's just say, I've seen many cyber ransoms that are just as low as 300 Australian dollars. That doesn't mean you're going to get your information when you actually pay that ransom. Sometimes you will, sometimes you won't. But again, these kinds of password managers are things that make it just that more difficult for cyber criminals to actually access your info. I talked about multi-factor authentication. A lot of people will do 2, where you get a text through your phone or you get an email that you have to link on before you actually see information. But the best cybersecurity is really a 3-tier multi-factor authentication. And for really critical information about your clients, for instance, again, your participants, the plans that they are on with NDIS, the staff that you send out to their locations. And again, to think like a criminal, you need to think, if I know that that particular participant is in daycare from this day to this day, and I've got their address because I've accessed your information, I know when their supported independent living is going to be empty, and that gives me an opportunity to send somebody there to break into that location. So these are scenarios that you need to think about, the information that you hold, confidential information, not just about your business, but about your clients as well. So it's really important to think about multi-factor authentication across 3 things: something you are, something you have, and something you know. Because again, if you had a 3-tier multi-factor authentication across those 3 things, it's going to be very hard to crack. Those are the links to the things that I've just showed you about testing both your passwords, to check your emails if they've been stolen, and also password managers as well. So you can take a look at their sites, but there are other password managers as well. Lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about backups. And again, backups are a bit like my cybersecurity conversations that I have. Realistically, you should be running multiple backups, and you should be running that at least once a day, sometimes twice a day. If you have it automatically set up for these backups, it can happen with a lot of, without a huge amount of effort. But every day you should have 3 remote copies of your information in your business, at least across 2 forms of media, and then at least 1 off-site. So it should be hosted in the cloud somewhere as well. Recovery from cyber attacks are probably some of the biggest costs that you will have as a business. If a ransomware gets a hold of your organization's information and you have not properly backed it up, and you are working from a backup from last month, it is a huge risk and it's a huge issue for your business. At least if you are running multiple backups, as I'm suggesting here, you will have the ability to get your business up in a matter of hours versus a matter of days and weeks. So backups are incredibly important. And again, keep in mind, it is very important that if you have staff who are working remotely on their phones or working at their homes, that there is a backup policy in place with you as a business that you are expecting, if people are working at home on your information, that it is properly backed up as well. So again, this may seem like overkill to you as far as backups are concerned, but I'll tell you, it is incredibly important to make sure that those hard copy backups are in different locations, because it's all about, there's a ransomware that locks you out of everything, that you can get that back, in a very, very short period of time. And working with an IT professional on how those backups can occur and where they can occur is critical to your cybersecurity success. So let's just finally wrap up with minimum conversations and recommendations. So this would be the minimum recommendations that I'm giving to you that you need to start at. Create and maintain password policies for your company. Enable unused themes and plugins from your websites to be disabled. Use a password manager and a multi-factor authentication. Lock your PC when you're absent. Never use what's known as WEP security, or basically old Wi-Fi. This is older, unprotected public Wi-Fi. Never use it. Use at least a WPA2 status Wi-Fi, and it will identify straight away whether it's a WEP or a WPA2. That includes hotels. When you're doing work from hotels, make sure that it's a protected, otherwise use a hotspot from your phone. Okay, it's very easy to access computers when you're using that old Wi-Fi that's unprotected. Whenever an employee leaves, change your business passwords, change the Wi-Fi access. It's very, very important even if an employee leaves on good terms, you still need to make sure all those things are changed. Ensure employees are educated about phishing, opening up suspicious links, spear phishing, robot attacks. You really need to make sure that people are trained in cybersecurity. Your staff need to understand and educate about opening links that look like it's coming from internal staff. And there are keys and things that should be managed with that. And employ a 3-2-1 strategy for backups. Ideally, again, using the platform that I was telling you about, as far as 3 different remote backups, 2 media backups, and 1 offsite website backup. Right. So this is. If you're interested in how many breaches have taken place in Australia in 2018 or 2019, just go to that link. You will be shocked, because they detail all the data breaches of all the businesses in Australia in 2019 so far. And if you really want to wake up to what cybersecurity can mean to your business, just go into that 2018 or 2019 breach list. It will be enough to scare you into definitely taking some productive courses and steps for cybersecurity. Right, that's the resources for the online hub for small business digital champions. Do we have time for some questions?
Hey, Will, we don't actually have any questions at the moment, but everyone, if anyone has a question later on down the track, feel free to email it through to info@ndp.org.au. Yeah, just anytime you have a question, just send that through. Thanks, Will.
Yep, and if you send through questions, then absolutely, I will individually come back to you and answer. And I want to encourage everybody, again, to start to build their digital transformation strategies.
Well, thanks very much, Will.
No worries at all. Thank you all for attending. Appreciate it.